The call came on a Tuesday morning, and I remember it because I'd just gotten back to my desk with a cup of coffee that I never ended up drinking. My phone buzzed. Internal line. My manager's assistant. He'd like to see you at 10. Conference room B. Not his office. Conference room B. That's when I knew. I sat there for a moment, looking at the coffee going cold in my hand, and I thought about the date. March 14th. My stock options were set to vest on March 28th. 14 days away. 18 years of my life sitting in a number on a piece of paper, waiting 2 more weeks to become real. I set the coffee down, pulled open my desk drawer, and took out the copy of my employment contract I'd kept there for the last 3 months. Page 31. I'd read that page so many times the paper had gone soft at the fold. I read it one more time. Then I put it back, picked up my notepad, and walked to conference room B. My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 53 years old, and for 18 years I was a senior infrastructure architect at a mid-sized financial technology company based in Columbus, Ohio. We built the back-end systems that processed payment transactions for regional banks across the Midwest and Southeast. Unglamorous work, complicated work. The kind of work that nobody notices until something breaks, and in 18 years, nothing broke on my watch. I came up through the Army. Signal Corps, 6 years, got out at 23 as a staff sergeant, used the GI Bill to finish my computer science degree at Ohio State, got hired as a junior network engineer at what was then a 30-person company operating out of a converted warehouse near the Short North. I helped build that company from 30 people to 400. I was there through 3 rounds of venture funding, 2 acquisitions, and 1 near bankruptcy that nobody on the outside ever knew about. By the time the story I'm telling you happened, I was 53, making $210,000 a year plus benefits, and sitting on stock options that had been granted to me in 2 tranches over the previous 4 years. The second tranche, the larger one, was worth $1.8 million at current share price and was scheduled to vest on March 28th, 14 days. The man who called that meeting was our Chief Operating Officer. I'll call him the COO because that's what he was, and because I don't enjoy giving people like him the dignity of a name in a story like this. He'd been with the company for 3 years, brought in by the new board after our second acquisition. He wore slim-fit suits and talked about talent optimization the way other people talk about the weather, frequently, without much thought. He was 39 years old. There were 2 other people in conference room B when I arrived. Our head of HR, a woman named Rosalind, who I'd worked with for 11 years and who couldn't look me in the eye, and a man I didn't recognize, sitting to the right of the COO with a yellow legal pad and a company lanyard that identified him as outside counsel. I sat down across from them. The COO didn't waste time. He told me the company was undergoing a strategic realignment of its infrastructure function. They were moving to a managed services model, outsourcing the architecture and network operations work to a third-party provider based in Austin. My position, along with 6 others on my team, was being eliminated, effective immediately. I would receive 12 weeks of severance, continuation of health benefits through COBRA, and outplacement services. He slid a manila folder across the table. I didn't touch it. What's the timeline for this transition? I asked. We're targeting a 90-day handoff to the Austin team, he said. And the board approved this. The board approved the realignment, yes. When? He glanced at outside counsel. February's board meeting. I wrote that down. February's board meeting. I'd been in a planning session with this same COO in early February, building out an 18-month infrastructure roadmap. He'd shaken my hand at the end of that session and told me the company's technical future was in good hands. I assume, I said, that you have documentation of a performance improvement plan or any formal notice of performance concerns. Rosalind finally looked up. Something crossed her face. Not guilt exactly, more like the look a person gets when they realize they're watching a car accident they can't stop. This is a position elimination, the COO said. It's not performance related. I understand that's the framing, I said. I'm asking about documentation. There is no performance documentation because this isn't a performance termination. I nodded slowly. Wrote that down too. One more question, I said. My stock option grant agreement, specifically the second tranche scheduled to vest on the 28th, does this termination affect that timeline? The outside counsel leaned forward slightly. The COO said, Your options will be handled per the standard separation terms. It's outlined in the folder. I picked up the folder, opened it, flipped to the section on equity. Read the language they drafted. Standard forfeiture clause for unvested options upon separation. I see, I said. I closed the folder, put it in my lap, looked at the COO. I'll have my things out by end of day, I said. He seemed relieved. That was his first mistake, thinking it was over. I need to back up about 4 months to November, because that's where this story actually starts. In November, I'd been having lunch with an old army buddy named Spencer who'd gone into employment law after leaving the service. We try to get together a few times a year. He's in Cincinnati, I'm in Columbus, so we split the difference and meet in Dayton, usually at a diner off I-75 that neither of us would ever choose independently, but that we've been going to for 15 years out of pure habit. I told him about the acquisition, about the new board, about the COO and his talent optimization language and the way he'd been quietly building a parallel org chart using contractors and outside vendors, about the timing of my second stock option tranche. Spencer set down his coffee and asked me a question I hadn't expected. Do you have a copy of your original employment agreement? Not the offer letter, the full contract. I did. I'd signed it 7 years ago when I was promoted to the senior architect role, and my compensation structure changed. It was 38 pages long, and I had read approximately 4 of them at the time. Find it, Spencer said. Read the whole thing. If there's anything in there about equity acceleration or termination timing provisions, call me immediately. I found it that night. Read all 38 pages. On page 31, buried in section 14C, under a heading that read Equity Compensation Special Provisions for Key Personnel, I found the following. In the event that the company initiates separation of a key personnel designee within 45 calendar days prior to a scheduled equity vesting date and absent documented and substantiated cause for termination as defined in Section 9, the company shall be obligated to compensate the separated employee at 150% of the fair market value of the unvested equity tranche at the time of separation, plus reasonable attorney's fees as determined by a court of competent jurisdiction or binding arbitration. I called Spencer the next morning. He was quiet for a long moment after I read it to him. Nathan, he said, do you know if you're still classified as key personnel under your current title? I didn't know, but I knew where to find out. In January, under the guise of preparing for my annual performance review, I asked Rosalind to send me a copy of my current personnel file summary, including my employment classification. She did, because that was a routine request and there was no reason for her to flag it. The summary confirmed that I held the designation of Key Infrastructure Personnel, Tier 1, a classification that had been attached to my role since a regulatory audit 4 years prior required the company to formally designate certain technical roles for continuity planning purposes. Key personnel. Tier 1. Section 14C implied to me. I called Spencer back. He came up to Columbus the following week, and we spent 4 hours going through every line of the contract. He confirmed what I'd read. If the company terminated me without documented cause within 45 days of my March 28 vesting date, they owed me 150% of $1.8 million, which came to $2.7 million plus attorney's fees. This clause was almost certainly drafted years ago and forgotten, Spencer said. I've seen this before. A junior associate writes it in during contract negotiation. It gets signed, it gets filed, and nobody looks at it again. They're going to try to fire me, I said. Do you know that for certain? I know it, the way you know when the weather's about to change, I said. I've been in this building for 18 years. I can read it. Then here's what you need to do, Spencer said. Nothing. Don't mention the clause. Don't change your behavior. Don't hire me officially. Not yet. Just keep your head down, document everything, keep copies of your performance reviews and any positive feedback you've received in writing, and if the meeting comes, go in, be professional, and call me the moment you walk out. That was January. For 2 months, I did exactly that. I kept working. I kept documenting. I saved every email in which my work was praised, every message in which the COO referenced my involvement in key projects, every Slack thread in which my team's output was cited by leadership. I built a folder on my personal laptop, not my work machine, with 214 individual documents by the time March arrived. And on March 14th, 14 days before my options were set to vest, I got the call to conference room B. I walked out of that building at 4:47 p.m. with a cardboard box containing a framed photo of my daughter at her college graduation, a coffee mug from my first Army unit reunion, and a small cactus that had survived on my desk for 11 years. I sat in my car in the parking garage for exactly 3 minutes. Then I called Spencer. He answered on the first ring. "It happened," I said. "Okay," he said. "Tell me everything." I told him everything. The conference room, the 2-sentence script the COO had delivered, the fact that outside counsel was present but said almost nothing, the language in the separation folder about forfeiture of unvested options, the absence of any performance documentation. Spencer made me repeat that last part. They have no performance documentation? None. Rosalind said so in the room. The COO said so in the room. The framing was entirely that it was a position elimination. "Nathan," Spencer said. They walked right into it. Spencer sent the demand letter 11 days later. I'll tell you what was in it because the details matter. The letter cited Section 14C of my employment agreement. It documented that March 14th, the date of my termination, fell within the 45-day window preceding my March 28th vesting date, specifically at day 14. It confirmed my key personnel, Tier 1 designation using the official classification from my own personnel file, which the company had provided to me voluntarily in January. It documented the COO's own statement in the termination meeting that the separation was not performance-related and that no performance documentation existed. The letter noted that 150% of $1.8 million is $2.7 million. It stated that the company was liable for that amount, plus attorney's fees. It requested a response within 10 business days. Spencer told me later that he knew the letter had landed badly when the company's outside counsel, a different attorney from the one who'd sat in conference room B, called him within 48 hours. "That's not a good sign for them," Spencer said. "When they move fast, it means someone read the clause and panicked." The negotiation took 6 weeks. I'm not going to walk you through every back and forth because some of it was genuinely tedious and some of it is covered by the terms of the settlement, which included a confidentiality provision I intend to respect. What I can tell you is the general shape of how it went. The company's first position was that Section 14C was unenforceable because the 45-day window was a drafting error, that the intent had been a 15-day window and someone had typed an extra digit. Spencer requested they produce any documentation supporting that claim. They could not. The second position was that I was not actually a key personnel designee at the time of termination because a reorganization in the prior year had technically reclassified certain roles. Spencer produced the personnel file summary that Rosalind had sent me in January, on company letterhead dated January 9th, 8 weeks before my termination, classifying me as key infrastructure personnel, Tier 1. That ended that argument. The third position was that the word cause in Section 14C should be read broadly to include business necessity and position elimination. Spencer pointed them to Section 9, which defined cause explicitly and narrowly, documented performance failure, misconduct, or violation of company policy. A position elimination driven by a strategic outsourcing decision did not meet any of those definitions. After 6 weeks, we reached a settlement. I said I'd respect the confidentiality provision, and I will. But I'll tell you this much. The settlement was fair. Spencer told me it was more than fair. He said in 20 years of employment law, he'd rarely seen a clause written as cleanly in favor of the employee, and he'd even more rarely seen a company walk into it so completely without cover. The 12 weeks of severance they'd originally offered me, it's sitting in a savings account somewhere, untouched. I didn't need it. There's something I haven't told you yet, and it's the part of this story that I think about most. About 3 weeks after I left, I got a message from a former colleague who was still inside. He told me that the company's largest client, a regional bank holding company out of Louisville that accounted for roughly 30% of our annual revenue, had declined to renew their service contract. The reason cited in the client's formal notice, according to my contact, was loss of confidence in technical continuity and key personnel stability. The client's CTO had worked with me personally for 6 of the 8 years they'd been our customer. We had a relationship built on 18 years of infrastructure work I'd done that he understood and trusted. The COO who eliminated my position had never met him. The managed services provider in Austin who was supposed to handle the transition. They'd had the account for 11 days when the client sent the non-renewal notice. I heard later that the board called an emergency meeting. I heard the COO was asked some pointed questions about the timing of the restructuring and what due diligence had been conducted regarding key client relationships. I don't know what happened in that room. I wasn't there, and I don't have any interest in being there. What I know is what I learned over 18 years in that building, and what the Army taught me before that. You don't get caught by the thing you see coming. You get caught by the thing you decided not to read carefully. I'm writing this from my home office in Columbus. It's a Tuesday morning, which feels fitting. I have a cup of coffee next to my laptop that I'm actually drinking this time. My daughter called last night to ask how I was doing. I told her I was fine, which is the truth. I told her I'd been doing some consulting work, which is also the truth. 3 companies have reached out since word got around about my situation, and I've been selective about which conversations I'm willing to have. She asked me if I was angry. I thought about the COO in his slim-fit suit. I thought about Rosalind not being able to look at me. I thought about the outside counsel with his yellow legal pad who never said a single word during that meeting, and who I now suspect had already read Section 14C before he walked in and was sitting there knowing exactly what they were walking into. No, I told her, not angry. What I am is grateful. Grateful that Spencer asked me about my contract over bad coffee in a Dayton diner. Grateful that I read all 38 pages instead of 4. Grateful for 24 years of professional experience that taught me the difference between the document that matters and the one they want you to focus on. Here's what I want you to take from this, and I'm not talking to you as someone who won a negotiation or came out ahead on a settlement. I'm talking to you as someone who worked in corporate America for 25 years and watched good people get walked out of buildings with cardboard boxes and nothing to show for it because they never knew what was in their own contracts. Read your employment agreement, not the offer letter, not the summary your HR department hands you on the first day. The actual contract, every page. If there's language you don't understand, find someone who does. If there are provisions about equity, classification, or termination timing, you need to know what they say before you need to know what they say. Section 14C existed in my contract for 7 years before I read it. 7 years. It sat on page 31 while I went to work every day and built systems and solved problems and trusted that the company I'd given nearly 2 decades to would treat me with the basic dignity my record had earned. They didn't. But because I finally read page 31, it didn't matter. Read your contract, all of it, every page. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened. Not the legal part, not the settlement, but the deeper mechanics of how the whole thing unfolded. The COO didn't lose because he was unlucky. He lost because he made a decision based on what he assumed rather than what he knew. He assumed I was just another mid-career employee who'd sign whatever was put in front of him, take the 12 weeks, and disappear quietly. He assumed that 18 years of institutional knowledge could be replaced with a vendor contract and a 90-day handoff. He assumed that a client relationship I'd spent 6 years building was an asset that belonged to the company rather than to the trust between 2 people who'd worked through hard problems together. Every one of those assumptions was wrong, and the thing about assumptions made in confidence is that they don't just fail, they fail expensively. That's not luck. That's cause and effect. The COO acted without doing the work of actually knowing what he was dealing with, and the consequences followed as naturally as anything follows from anything. Spencer used to say back in his Army days, which were the same years as mine, that preparation isn't about predicting the future. It's about making sure that when something goes sideways, you've already done the thinking that the moment requires. Reading that contract in November, understanding what Section 14C meant, building that folder with 214 documents, none of that was clever. It was just the work, quiet, unglamorous, unremarkable work done months before it mattered. That's the part that doesn't make a good story but is actually the whole story. I think about Rosalind too. She couldn't look at me in that conference room, and I understood why. She'd been there 11 years. She knew what I'd built. She was sitting across the table from me because that was a job and because the alternative, pushing back on a COO who'd already made up his mind, carried its own risks. I don't have hard feelings toward her. She was navigating her own version of the same calculus everyone in that building was navigating. What I want people to take from this isn't triumph. I'm not interested in a story about winning. What I want is for someone watching this to go home tonight and find their employment contract, the actual one, not the offer letter, and read it, all of it, not because something bad is coming, but because the time to understand what you signed is not the morning you're called into conference room B. Intelligence without application is just potential. Knowing your rights, in theory, and never looking up what your contract actually says, is the same as not knowing them at all. I got lucky in one sense. Spencer asked the right question over bad coffee in a Dayton diner before any of this happened. Most people don't get that prompt. Most people find out what their contract says after it's too late for the information to be useful. You are the only person guaranteed to look out for your own interests with the full weight of what's actually at stake. Not your HR department, not your manager, not the company attorney sitting in the corner with a yellow legal pad who already knows what's on page 31. Do the reading. Do it now, before you need it. That's the whole lesson. That's all I've got.